recording this presentation, and so I will post the presentation on the village website, so that everybody who's not here. Mike and the Parks Commission put in a lot of work to come up with this proposal. I want to present this tonight, and we scheduled another meeting for February 1st, also at Wednesday. At that point, hopefully we'll be hearing feedback from all the merchants, landlords, and residents on the plan. And so with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mike. It's your presentation.
I'm going to do the presentation, but lots of people worked on this. Members of the commission, Jim Newell was on board council, Jay Schott, and Susan Harris White on the committee. The mayor contributed a tremendous amount. Amber and her team in the police department, Ben Hines. We had consultation with folks in the Chamber of Commerce, and collectively, a couple hundred people last year who worked on this that we talked to that have had various levels of input.
What do you use for Mike?
I already asked her. She said, can everybody hear me?
Yeah. No, I was just thinking about
I already asked her, but she said she thought it was okay.
Oh, okay.
So what I'm going to do is go through a presentation of really a report that's been out on the website since I think July. This is the first of 3 meetings. We'll be meeting on the 1st of February, which we are focused on
Hearing the feedback from the merchants, landlords, residents about this proposal.
Okay.
And then there'll be a 3rd meeting, I believe, is scheduled for February 15th, that's a Wednesday, to take into consideration the comments made on the first changes to this plan, and look at a final plan that would be recommended to council to act or not act on.
if they're going to turn you on. So what I'm going to do is run through about, there's about 24 slides in total. As that sounds imposing, it's going to go pretty quick. A number of them are some pictures and some build slides, so we'll go very quickly. Real quickly, for those people who don't know, Parking Commission is not a policy body. We're an advisory body. Village Council makes the final decision on what will be done. Nothing on what we're going to talk about here is enacted on the Village Council so far. That's what this process is leading up to, a series of proposals that the mayor and Jim will probably be putting together as far as legislation and specific proposals. So keep that in mind. The Parking Commission's mission, we're here to review facts of the parking situation, develop recommendations for Village Council to consider. We published the first draft on June 30th of a plan concept, which is what we're going to go over today. Village Council and the administration chose to defer acting on that because there was a lot going in the second half of last year, not the least of which was working on the income tax increase and a number of other things that were judged to take priority, and we're working with that, so it was an intentional decision to defer until early this year. That also gave us the opportunity in the second half of 2016 to have some follow-on meetings and collect a considerable amount of additional information that fed into some of the further research. Plan identifies, as we get into it, a number of things around technology and a number of other enforcement and a number of other related issues that were known to require some administrative research in the second half of 2016. A lot of that got done. So before I go on, and some of you have seen this, there's a lot of people here that have been to some other meetings, but there was a newspaper in Chagrin Falls that was published from 1874 to 1964 called The Exponent. What I'm going to put up here is an article that was in 1903 complaining about a shortage of hitching posts in the village and how this was a huge deterrent for farmers coming to the village to be able to do, to buy and frequent our merchants. So this is obviously something that is not a new issue in many respects, and when you read through this, a lot of the issues are exactly the same things: substitute parking spaces, hitching posts, and horses. As we went through the plan, what we were trying to do was create a comprehensive plan that considered the interests of all of the various stakeholders ended up with a comprehensive plan that worked for everyone. Kind of an overview, and while we were trying to do something that was fair, the reality is there is no perfect solution to parking in the village because we have a significant number of competing constraints. We have geographic and physical constraints. We have a dense central business district, which is essentially ringed completely around with residential. We always say the river running through the middle, which is another physical constraint. There's the issue of public versus private property constraints. One of the areas that we'll talk about a little bit later when people think about some long-term solutions that might involve potentially a parking structure, you get into issues about the use and how private property considerations are going to be affected by the financial constraints. Many of the potential long-term solutions are very expensive, very high investment, and putting together plans as those are the long-term solutions that meet the financial and the funding requirements is a constraint that needs to be considered. And then finally, those four shareholder or stakeholder groups that I talked about in some ways have competing interests. So when you put together a plan, it's hard to get compromises that satisfy everybody in every aspect. One of the other things that I found very interesting as I was doing research about parking and how other communities have dealt with it, there's a lot of very interesting articles about this. I encourage anybody that's really interested to Google parking for free. Is parking free? And what you learn, or what I learned, was that there's all sorts of costs related to parking, whether it's infrastructure and roads and paving associated with it, whether it's enforcement, whether it's hidden costs. The parking isn't available, the cost of merchants and restaurants and whatnot, people who don't come because it's hard to find parking. Those are all costs, and those costs are borne by one of those, by some split of those stakeholders. Someone is paying those costs, and it's a matter of who. So the big question is, who should be paying those costs, and how is it fair, and how does a program that involves sharing those costs affect the overall parking dynamics of the community? So any program, what became clear to us on the committee very early on, was that any program was going to be a series of compromises and optimization inside available resources and the consideration of these constraints. And there's probably nobody that is going to like every single aspect of any plan given the constraints and the realities of what we're dealing with. But we tried to put together something that was balanced across the stakeholders. And finally, as we get through this, there's some specific actions that are going to be highlighted. And I think that while we've done a lot of work to try to anticipate what the effects of those are, whether the effect on behavior or how enforcement is going to be done, the reality is we really won't know 100% exactly how things are going to play out until you actually get into it. So I think one of the things that we've been talking about is the recognized needs going into this, that there will undoubtedly need to be aspects of this that will have to be adjusted based on real-time facts and experience once the DLP is in place. A little profile of the parking. This is, has been, I haven't changed numbers because this is what was in the report that we published in June. This was the result of a walking tour that we took to kind of do an inventory of what we thought would be village-controlled parking inventory. Roughly about 400, there's 10 or 15 additional spots that were identified, but I'll show you in a moment on a map. But there's roughly 400 spots controlled by the village. Currently, 120 to 130 of them are metered, and the remainder of them are unmetered. This is a map, and the highlighted in the amber and yellow are these village-controlled spots. We got obviously the river here. This is Main Street, way of East Washington. We're right over here, and so this is the meeting lot, and the village council or the village hall is at this location. So what we have is a very eclectic, very spread out. This represents, I think, about 415 spots. And I said there's about 15 spots that we identified above and beyond the walking tour that I highlighted in the previous one. So this is what we start with. This is what's available today. So problem statement. We are a destination. We had a meeting a few weeks ago where someone said some of the communities that we were using as have a serious parking congestion issue in peak hours and seasonal variable. In the winter, it's a lot less than it is during the summer, obviously. And there's times of year like Boston, there's never going to be enough parking. And I've had a few people that have come up to me and said, well, I never have a problem finding parking. I think for those of us who live here, we all know that special place that you can always kind of find a smart parking spot, and we've got our own done. But the issue is that people don't live here, they don't know that they're coming here. It is not a parking friendly location to be able to easily find if you don't live way around town. And so I think it's very scary. Over the last year, I've probably talked to 100, 150 people not living in Chagrin Falls who learned that I was on a enrollment in the parking commission, and almost consistent, I'd say 80% of them said there were times that they avoided times coming to Chagrin Falls simply because they had all the time finding spots. So the cost associated with that, related to potential business our merchants and our businesses might get. Can you quantify that? No, I don't think you can. Is it real? Yes. Is it big? I think it is significant. That's open to opinion, but it is real for sure. So this discourages some intent, visitors and business activities. Peak parking periods. A lot of polling around from police department, Andrews Group, and Ben Hines and other folks, but the general consensus was 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Monday through Friday, 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. on Friday and Saturday evenings, every time and out entertainment periods, and then seasonal differences, winter being the low time in terms of parking congestion, and the rest of the year having different seasonal profiles. No plan, so there's nothing in here that is intended to be a solution to Blossom or Arden Park. There's no solution. I don't care what plan you've got. The reality just is there's not enough footprint on the entire Chagrin Falls to be able to handle that if we try to attack that as a goal. One of the issues that arose very early in talking with various merchants was the observation. This is an anecdotal survey, but it probably talked to 10 or 15 different merchants and whatnot. And the consensus was that during the peak period, the village controlled spaces, somewhere between 60 to 80% of the existing village-owned spots during the peak period are occupied by employees of businesses. This will come back to some of the rationale for some of the actions that we propose. It doesn't mean employees are important. They're very important source of resource to the village, not the least of which is village tax receipts and payroll withholding. But at the same time, if we consume the parking resource from employees, those are spots that are undermining the availability for business patrons across the range of our businesses. So the commission really looked at this whole parking concept with two different time frames. One being the long term, and this really is another word for a parking facility. These are actions that can have major impact, but the practical reality is that there are things, projects that even if they were active today are 2+ years from concept to completion when you run through all of the issues of engineering, facility, construction, all of those, 2 years or more is a fairly realistic expectation once that gets started. They're relatively high investment, which raises issues about where does the capital come from, and the staff and the variable expense to support them. Actions require investment, public or private, and it's outside the current village budget. So other resources and revenue bases would have to be obtained. We'll get to some of those potentials later on. But it does result in a fundamental increase in parking capacity. Near-term actions, which is really most of what we're going to talk about today, are things that can have impact within 6 to 18 months. They're relatively low investment requirements in terms of capital, staff, and variable expenses. The actions are self-funding. The things we're going to talk about don't require consuming existing revenue. They generate revenue that supports them. And it functions within the existing physical, financial, and logistical constraints. So we have specific information and specific thoughts Users, broadly defined, which are parkers, parking, businesses, people are using and benefiting. The concept of the principle was need to share in a portion of the net parking cost. And if we get into this, the way we do this is through a revenue element that we'll describe in a couple moments. At the plan, needed to consider and reflect, as I said earlier, the interests of all the stakeholders in the plan. Parking fees and methods to incentivize desired parking behaviors. It was pointed out to me by the mayor the other day that there's been a number of different things that have been done in parking over the years, but they've all been kind of discrete, kind of pushing out the balloon, pushing on one side and pops out the other side. There really hasn't been a really looking at all of the aspects to really put together a comprehensive behavioral adjustment, if you will, of parking behaviors. That's what we try to do here, and we'll get into the details here in a moment. We're going to target peak parking demand time of the season. We're going to be sensitive to the costs of parking across the range of users. This isn't just a matter of raising prices on parking. There's got to be some logic, and it's got to be sensitive, and it's got to understand and be fair to all parties. Integrate advanced technology solutions as much as practically possible. A lot of work has been done on that. And then balance the financial impact on the village businesses and the village finances. We can't lose sight of the fact that our businesses last year, in 2015, contributed 46% of all the revenues that's in the village budget, and 59% of the income taxes. So that's both the employees and the business owners. So this is a very, very important part that we try to keep in mind. And at the same time, business has parking interests that relate to patrons and employees, two things that can, in a way, be countered and in conflict with one another. And we also believe that it's very important to involve the co-op employers into the program administration, and I'll explain specifically what that means in a minute. Long-term actions, again, that's code word for a parking structure. Again, it adds materially. It's complex engineering, location, logistical, financial impact. We talked about that before. A plan to put in a parking facility has got to consider all of those, including a revenue stream to support that. So we can't have paid parking in the parking garage and free parking everywhere else, or the economic model of the parking garage doesn't work because the parking garage would be the parking space of last resort. So these are some of the things, all of them have to be put together. It's not a matter of just seeing a site and having a picture. A plan involves the logistical, engineering, and construction of all of those factors go into it. Most of the locations that are most frequently talked about are problematic. For example, one spot that is probably most commonly talked about is putting something in the muni lot across from Village Hall. The problem there is that you would take, there's 120-some spots in that lot, you'd be taking 30% of the entire village parking capacity out of service for between 6 and 12 months to construct the parking garage there. And the impact, the disruptive impact on the village condos would be extraordinary. Just as an example, if you consider what the Euclid corridor effect had in Cleveland is a heck of a lot less dependent upon the income tax and based on Euclid Avenue. Even today, 10 years after that project has been finished, much of the area from Public Square with a couple of pockets all the way to Playhouse Square is a commercial wasteland still. So the potential effect serious proposal in the last 10 years, talking with Tom Rick and with Kurt Maricomico. And I mean a serious structure, not meaning simply an idea, because there are lots of ideas. I mean an idea that comes with an engineering feasibility, a logistical plan, a financing plan, and the necessary people to actually go execute the project. That's what a serious project is. So when I say there isn't a serious project, I don't mean to say there haven't been people that have ideas. It's a matter of something that is actionable that will actually achieve something. And there has not been a reliable program project that I'm aware of, talking to folks that have been around for the last 10 years. So a parking garage and parking structure can't be thrown out as a long-term solution. It is viable, it's real, it should continue to be looked at. But without with a private project leadership, it's improbable. There's nothing on the horizon right now that has that as a practical solution for the challenge that we're facing in the next 5-year period. I will say, as we get into it, some of the financial constraints around a project can be contributed to, perhaps not totally satisfied, but can help with some of the outcomes of the near-term action plan that we talked about. So near-term, again, it's stuff we can do in 6 to 18 months. We identified 7 elements of this. I'm going to each one of these. We're not getting into the meat of what we're proposing to village council that they consider doing. The first one is implement fee for parking in all village controlled spaces. I'll define what we meant by that there in a moment. Village capacity and infrastructure actions. We have identified a plan to add between 80 and 120 new spaces available, and I'll go into that in a moment as well. Employee parking alternatives. Again, a plan that will move employees, a portion of the employees, between 100 and 150 employees away from the center city to free up the center village and free up that space for non-employee parking alternatives. We're looking at doing that through a series of employee parking permits and incentives that give employees and employers an incentive to relocate their park of choice. We have a feature in here about resident permits, so people that are living here for a relatively low fee would be able to get a permit. They wouldn't have to feed a meter or feed a kiosk at any time. There are enforcement and administration options, which actually are pretty exciting based on some of the additional research work that has been done in the fourth quarter. The technology that is available to assist in the enforcement activities is pretty impressive. And then finally, some recommendations on the use of net parking revenue after capital and expenses are covered. So again, just one more of the 7 across the bottom come up into the comprehensive plan, considering the interests of the 4 stakeholders. Just going through a little bit more detail on each of the 4. We're talking about in the first one, which is fee for parking in all village controlled lots. We're talking about fee for parking, maintain the current 50 cents per hour rate, extend the period, we believe, from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Monday and Thursday, and then from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. on Friday and Saturday to cover the peak, in that of the peak time. We've also talked about, and are under consideration, extending the courtesy time, which is now at 10 minutes in most cases, to some extended period of time. No particular number have been pegged at this point, but that's in general, in specifics what we propose as far as fee for parking. The next thing is the village parking capacity, and I've got a map here in a moment, but Jim Newell has led negotiating with a number of private lot owners to lease primarily for in-kind services, somewhere between 100 to 150 additional spaces. No farther than 5 to 10 minute walk from center of the village. The largest section of it is less than 700 feet, so we're talking less than 5 minutes for most people to be able to cover that. And there's specific spaces, and not all the employee spaces will be remote from what is village controlled spaces today. There are designated spaces in our parking alternative. We got maps after this next one, not the previous one. So the idea is that through economic incentives, in other words, if we stay at $50 at 50 cents an hour for basically half price, the employees would be able to park in these designated spaces. We'll talk about the permits here in a moment and how that would do. If we're successful in being able to relocate between 100 and 200 employees from the center of the village here and essentially free up those spaces for patrons. We see that they solve the hitching post issue. So this is the map, and what I'll some of the colors are a little bit hard here, but just to show you. And up here, this slide is the top of the screen is here. This is the Lutheran Church, and we have reached an agreement to lease 49 spaces of the Lutheran Church. There are 25 spaces along East Orange. We've identified 38 spaces on the backside of the Uni lot. There's 20. This is 25. I thought it was 22 spaces. 25 spaces in the Plaza Apartments parking lot. We've got 15 spaces that have been agreed to by the Federated Church, and during the summer, with 37 spaces that the school district has allocated for use by the village. During the summer is the peak congestion period begins, where we have the most seasonal workers in restaurants and retail and whatnot. So this is only available during the summer, but it's also the peak period of need. The remainder of the spots on here would not be, so the purple spots and the yellow spots represent the spots that are designated at this point for employee parking, and those would be the spaces that we'd be.
You have to point out that one big parking.
I did already. The Lutheran Church.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was up here. It got cut off by the top of the screen. So this is the proposal. I should also say there's 10 spots down here on East West Washington that have been identified as possible employees. So these would be spaces that would be flagged for employee parking only. So these would be the, as you think about the priority standpoint, the first ones that are going to fill up are going to be these ones here, and then you're going to rotate around, and these ones would be closed, but these would probably be the overflow after people have parked in the others. So this is the current status. It's not final. Still talking with some other folks, but this is the current status of the thinking in terms of relocating and moving employees away from, incenting them to park somewhat remotely from the village. So parking incentives, these would be issued through employers, but would not be sold directly to employees. The concept is two things, two reasons for doing that. The employers basically are certifying that the people we're giving the employee permits to are truly employees. They're the ones who know what the employees are. Second is that individual employers can make a decision as to whether they want to subsidize the parking or not, and they can do that through payroll deduction on their pay system. So some employers may choose to subsidize. Some employers may choose not to subsidize, but they can make that on their own decision and inside of their own business priorities and business model. Resident parking permits we've been talking about for a nominal monthly cost, $50 a year, that people could, residents could get a parking sticker that would preclude them or allow them to park anywhere in a village-controlled spot without having to feed a meter because of the parking permit. So that's got various levels of attraction to various people, but again, it's a consumption decision. Enforcement administration, today we have a very, very complex fine system that's got, this happens for the first 2 days, and then when it's cloudy, something else happens, and when there's a full moon, something else happens. And so what we're proposing is that the enforcement rules be significantly simplified. The parking increased to $15 to $20. I thought 20, some other folks said 15, so $15 to $20, doubling it if it's not paid within 30 days. And there's still, we're suggesting that the feature that it says that if it hasn't been paid after 60 days, there is what amounts to kind of a lien placed on the person can't get their license plate renewed. That exists today, so that sounds really onerous, but that's already in place today. So it's just simplifying instead of the rely if-then parameters in the current legislation. It also talks about adding new enforcement technology. There's a lot out there in terms of scanning. When we talk about some of the things around kiosks, those are smart devices that can then feed into handheld devices that enforcement people can utilize, and it feeds back directly into a fine system at the police department. We're also talking about having online paying of fines and various other options. There's a bunch of neat technology out there. Nothing specifically has been decided, but I know the combination of the police department and Ben Hines are spending a lot of time researching that stuff. And finally, what we said was that what we wanted to recommend was that any net revenues, we'll talk about revenue potential here in a moment, from parking revenues would be restricted to funding parking program operations. So first of all, the funds would be used to pay for the expenses associated with implementing the parking. And any residual would be allocated to roads projects and capital projects in the village center, which also could conceivably include participation in debt service of a parking structure. So the village, any net revenues conceivably could be used and allocated to support public debts at some point down the future, to participate in some public-private initiative related to a parking structure, which would increase the attractiveness of doing that for a private party. So those are the 7 elements. We were asked at the last meeting, well, what is the revenue effects? And so I need to caveat this is that there's a bunch of assumptions that are here. Village Council hasn't approved anything, but one of the things that we did want to do as part of the model, part of the proposal, was to kind of think, what's possible with this? So what we did was we looked at a number of, and modeled a number of combinations. This is in the original report that was published as well. Looking at various occupancy rates. Facts are in 2015, the average occupancy rate during all of the metered hours for metered locations, 33% of the metered spaces were occupied at all times, which I think is reasonably high since 67. We had almost 300 of our spots were no meter at all. So people were going to park there first. So even with that, 33% of the front meters were occupied. So if you did an occupancy rate of 30, 40, or 50%, if you have 150 employee permits sold at $40 a month, which is half price, if 25% of the residents acquired a resident permit at 1.5 households or cars per household, and if you double the fine rate to $20, and by doing that, if you reduce the violation rate by 25%, by making it more expensive, so presumably people could pay more attention, maybe fewer relative fines might be per space, increasing the number of spaces, obviously, but the violation rate goes down. If you do that, then the gross revenue, again, on uncertain assumptions, this is not a forecast, this is a what if, the revenues range in gross level between $500,000 and $640,000 annually. It is expected that the cost of operations on an annual basis are probably going to be somewhere in the $250,000 to $300,000 range. That does not include repaving, drainage, and road maintenance, which is part of the village's budgets. When we get back to sharing the costs of parking, we're not talking about here having parking revenue necessarily funding the just standard repaving process at the village, and we think that there are, so we look at all these advanced technologies, some of it's pretty expensive. The difference between meters on, for example, self-fund, almost certainly, any of the operating costs. And it is likely that the program would provide net revenue, net proceeds between $150,000 and $200,000 annually for improvements and potentially future participation in funding a debt declining fund to participate in a structured project in a public-private initiative. So since we published the report in the summer, council, village administration has taken a number of actions, done a lot of research on new technology options in enforcement, kiosks, meters, what that all means. Smart devices have to be internet ready, so that calls into the operating costs. Are either going to be cellular communication with each device, or some kind of a Wi-Fi structure. There's some research on smart meters, for example, and some of the interesting things you learn is that only about 12% in any community that has smart meters that you can run cards for, only about 12% of the transactions actually use a credit card. The vast majority of the transactions, San Francisco, other cities that have done a lot of data out there, there is a relatively small percentage, and the cost of putting one of those in, both from the upfront cost of getting the smart meter and the operating cost of having to have each one of those meters be internet capable to be able to authorize a card is extremely expensive.
What's the bank share take?
Yeah, and I think we did to break even, if you wanted the fees from the meters, just that we was like doubling the per hour rate. So it calls into question from an economic standpoint whether smart meters is really a technology that works for us. But again, no decisions have been made, with just information at this point. Analyzing the staff effect, we're looking at, obviously, if we have 3 times as many fee parking spaces, Ralph can't do it all himself, so we got to call on Ralph a couple of times to get additional capacity to be able to do the enforcement. Right? Technology will help that by simplifying the process, but there's no question that there will need to be increased staffing both out on the street and for time to be able to do the administration permits as well as in enforcement administration. We've been working on helping deliver some procedural and facilities implementation plans with Ben, and there's been analysis done on what legislation actions, a checklist depending on the decisions that council or the administration takes to council and council approves of what legislation actions would be needed to kick the ball up and get the program running. And we continue to solicit public input to the concepts since we published the initial report. As Mary indicated, there's 2 more public meetings scheduled before we, based on all of that input,
kiosk can cover about 10 to 12 parking spaces. A single kiosk, if they're linear, if they're in a lot, they can cover a lot more, and they cost $15,000, $16,000. The meters cost $400 each. That's what we meant by cost. We know what the additional manpower may be, and we're going out. Council authorized us to go out for bids on Monday night, which we're going to be doing probably next
entertainment hours are different, restaurant hours have got different employee profile during the day versus retail versus the commercial businesses, the architects and whatnot, the lawyers that are in the second floor of the buildings along Main Street. So just like in an airline where they've got an 8 or 9% oversell rate because people don't show up, you have the same thing here, so we don't have to limit the number of spots. Now, whether that's a 50% oversell or it's a 20% oversell, I think you probably start at a lower number so that you and then observe and make the adjustment and bring it up. So those are some of the things we talked about in terms of planting flags specifically on a specific process. That's something we've been talking with Ben about.
Hi, I have a question actually does dovetails well with Carl said someone submitted online. They were watching this. And they asked, how would you handle non-employee contractors like realtors who come and go frequently during the day to meet their clients in buildings with no dedicated parking as opposed to workers who are here on fixed schedules or working shifts?
So one up there on the employee permits, and we've actually talked to a number of folks, there's the employee permits that would fall into two categories. One is discounted permits, okay, which is it would only be usable in the designated employee permits. There would be we've talked about another category, which would be a full price employee permit, okay, at 50 cents an hour, 175 hours in a full-time work week, that's $80. So someone could buy a permit for $80, and then they could basically park anywhere.
Right, okay.
And then they wouldn't be limited by it, so they could go in and out, and they would be able, but those people would be paying full load, in essence, 40 hours of 50 cents an hour. So that's one option. So whether that's the final solution to that issue, I don't know, because it's something that we thought about and considered, and it's in the chart, in the 7-step chart that's there.
And this is, I don't know if it's more of a comment or a question, but a resident asked, why would residents be charged for parking when they're already paying for the area through taxes? So, I mean, I don't know if you want to address that or not, because I know you're saying that the stakeholders pay in, but how did you arrive and be considered free parking permits, or would that just the cost just be too much for residents?
I think, again, there's no such thing as free parking, and I guess that's something that you could argue. Personally, I think it's not unfair. If it's $50 a year, we're talking $4 a month. So for unlimited free parking in the village. So I understand the point. It just seems.
I'm a resident of the village. I pay for parking at times. But it's the most money we can do. I don't mind throwing a quarter in here.
That sounds great. Okay. One more.
Explain that with my wife.
Exactly, there you go.
But I know, it's true.
The plants in the crowd. The last one actually is kind of unrelated. It's more about taxes. Maybe the mayor can answer. Is it possible to do some type of local sales tax to make money towards a parking structure? No,
certainly in favor of that. I think we've got our own worst enemies for that.
Great.
And the whole entire point of this is to provide more parking for people to come to Chagrin. I mean, that is the objective, it's not to raise money, and we would put 100% of the net profits back into the village downtown.
Right.
You know, Chief Dasik and the whole police department, Lisa, have done a lot of research, and a lot of it's been by reaching out to other communities. The options available are pretty staggering, and the flexibility in the different meters and stuff is very, very encouraging. So these are things that we can work with. We've had a couple questions about paying for parking spaces, and people hear smart meters and they're thinking it has to be credit card. Every meter, whether it's kiosk or the old-fashioned ones, they're all going to take coins. And when we say currency, I want to make this really clear. We've really come to the conclusion that taking dollar bills is not a real feasible option because the mechanical devices are constantly failing, particularly in severe weather conditions. So it will be credit cards, smartphone payment methods, and coins. But the other thing is that with this new software capability of these kiosks, merchant can actually offer payment coupons or pay the parking fee or do some promotional thing, come to Chagrin, here's free parking on us. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you need to start to really see, and it gets pretty exciting. The other thing that we've talked a lot about parking fees and the cost of it. We have to implement a parking fee because it's the only way we can do an adequate job of enforcement. This 2-hour honor system of parking on Main Street has not worked, and the police chief can allude to that. It is almost impossible to enforce, and it's created a little more of an underworld than a lot of people are even aware of. So by having a dollar amount focused on what their parking behaviors on, they're going to start to kind of work into a program that benefits the 5 different groups that we focused on in this commission.
It's amazing the number of all semi-organized avoidance programs that are actually being done out there.
So what you're saying, though, is that the employers would buy the parking spaces, or would the employees have to pay their own? So some people, and you're saying $80 a week, they make minimum wage.
Well, that's full time. The discount one is $95. It's $80 a month.
Right,
Okay.
well, still, I mean, it's still a lot of money when you're making minimum wage.
And so the idea is that permits would be issued to and purchased, if you will, by the employers. And then the employers then make the decision of, do I subsidize that? Do I not subsidize that? And they handle that through, and that's the only way that we can be assured that someone is actually an active employee. So that's the thinking of how the administration and then co-opting the business community into the program.
Can you put together an income tax credit for employers that need to buy parking passes yearly for a number of employees? If you get a substantial number in terms of dollar volume.
It's kind of left pocket, right pocket. That would be possible in theory, but with the proceeds of the net parking going to be put into the downtown, I think it's a kind of a come see, come saw. We eliminated a lot of the Main Street redo in 2005. For example, the area where we're sitting, kind of the entertainment district, River Street, West Street, the Little Theater, Emmett-Italian now, and the Gatekeepers, Jekyll's. A lot of improvements could be made in this area with some additional funds. And so, you know, it's something we could talk about, something we could look at. That's not something that could be discussed.
For the folks who weren't here, Mayor, you had an opportunity to talk to the mayor of Bowling Green and Cooperstown.
Yeah, Cooperstown actually is a very look-alike community to Chagrin Falls, both Cleveland that have put in this type of a system in two areas, one portion of the flats and one portion of either Little Italy or the museum district of University Circle. And Pittsburgh, who I don't believe we've spoken to, has also implemented this to control parking in the downtown and near downtown residential areas. But it's been smooth, and they've all said that it would really help the situation.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that is a problem, I have to admit that there were 2 Time Warner trucks parked outside of the inn today. Has any consideration been given to, with the inevitable construction, or particularly during the summer? I think right now, I don't believe that people that are working in buildings are ticketed. At least that's been my experience with the contractors.
As far as just a blanket, don't ticket them, or?
Right, yeah, or they put a phone behind their truck, and that's kind of a,
I don't know that to be true across the board. I mean, I guess we deal with those on a case-by-case basis, so from a law enforcement perspective, you know, if somebody has to be in somewhere to do work, as long as they're not creating a hazard or, blocking access to a business, and then to try to work with people so that the job is done. I mean, if
know, being one person who live right down here on those 2 weekends, people park, I sit down parking like Walmart. But, you know, it's 2 days, you kind of grit your teeth, look the other way. Yeah, so, but that is a solution.
I live on Make Work, and they're already, all employees park up on the street. So they leave their parking lot for, papers or whatever. So what, I mean, they're not paying, or will be paying for any kind of permit, they'll just keep using the other streets.
So one of the things when I said we need to adjust, we didn't talk about this, was that are we in essence herding employees to places like?
Well, the residents,
So-
because it's a real pain, can't back our driveway.
Right, so one of the things that we've already talked about is if we see that, and maybe we already see it, it needs to be done as part of the original, is do you go to 2-hour limit? Okay, but then also potentially have the ability for the residents, for their guests, to be able to print out a permit, put on a windshield, a permit for the, those are things that, do we have a solution for it? No, but it's something that's been recognized that we need to think of, and there are some various solutions that, some of them with a little bit of cumbersomeness to it, but they could be effective in dealing with that. But that's clearly one of the things that we need to watch. We talked specifically about potentially just driving people to park in the historic district or the main corridor or any of some of those other.
I mean, literally, they just, our
Yeah.
street lines sometimes with,
Right.
cars that, people that don't live there.
That's something
But
that we
isn't that a public,
Well, yes, it is, it is a
public street, I mean,
Right.
I can park there, anybody can park there.
Right, but these people park there every single.
Right,
day.
no, I
It's the
understand that.
employees, and their bosses are telling them to park there, so I'm not,
I don't know how
it's not
you
their
can
fault.
tell them they can't.
Well,
you can say it's
Unless
about
it becomes a public, or a village
Yeah.
controlled.
Yeah,
Yeah, an ordinance
you
on
can
it.
control that by making it 2-hour
Right,
parking.
right.
And then ticketing, whether or not moved in 2 hours. I mean, there's ways to, if you wanted to even go, to the extreme, you can make it residential parking only.
Right.
And you can handle that. But, we kind of want to feel our way as we're going
I
with
mean, I'm
this.
thinking of like Tom's employees who have pocketfuls of cash that are leaving at 11 o'clock and midnight and then walking really far because
problem with linear spots on the streets is that there's kind of a reasonable distance to walk to the kiosk. If you get out and you wanna go that way, the kiosk is that way, then you're walking in the opposite direction. All the kiosks are that different. So I don't think a decision has been made, but there's pluses and minuses to both either structure. And there's also enforcement differences. It's a lot easier to go by a meter than
done a lot of investigating, and we're gonna continue doing that, and we wanna encourage these questions to come in. Mike's done a phenomenal job putting all this together, and not only a draft or a proposal, but also some projected, slide projector presentation. I wanna thank you for all the hours you put into this.
Yeah, I'll join that too, Mike. Thank you very much for your work.
We hope everybody leaves here with the idea that this is an open discussion. We're going to move forward with a plan. We want everybody's input as we develop.
And it needs to be a living thing, with the whatever it is we implement, and there needs to be adjustments. And some things might not work, and they have to be thrown out, and new stuff added, but we'll be approaching this as being
Almost
just a
certainly,
different story.
it's gonna require multiple modifications, definitely. Almost certainly.
Then it's changed. Have a plan, then it's changed.
I mean, I'd echo the earlier comments. I think this is impressive work, and we've had a parking commission for as long as I've lived here, and they meet and they talk and they meet and they talk, and this is an actual step in a direction which hasn't been taken as long as I've lived here. So I commend you guys on the detail and the thoughtfulness and thoroughness, quite frankly. And I do look forward to this is obviously a lightning rod issue in town, and I look forward to getting additional feedback. I'm most interested in hearing from employees about the reasonableness of the $40 a month, and whether that is likely to cause them to do something different on parking on Elm Court or other places. So that'll be key for me, as well as how that plan is going to be administered, and that sort of goes to my question earlier. Last comment is in response to the resident on May Court or Elm Court, I can't remember what you said, May Court. Parking commission, at the council meeting 2 days ago on Monday, the parking commission was referred an issue up on Division Street, Cottage Street, where they're obviously closer to the entertainment district and have, I assume restaurant patrons could be employees, parking, nose to tail on that street, making it difficult for them to park on the street. And so where there's a public safety issue or a logistical issue with residents, that's something that we'll absolutely look into. And as we implement some plan and chase down the unintended consequences.
At the last parking commission meeting at Village Hall, there was, I don't know if it was the same person that was up there and was talking about they don't have a garage and they park out front. And
Some of them don't have driveways.
Yeah, I'm sorry, it was driveway, that's what it was. And she was asking, is there a way that I can have a reserved spot? And that was something, again, that's another piece of information that is something to adjust for. Because that's certainly a reasonable request.
Carl, I think the administration could be sending the council some ordinance recommendations in the near future, but what that ties to you would be one.
The other thing that's interesting, sorry, since I'm thinking about this, that we're talking about employee parking, it seems to be, parking in town seems to me to be an issue on the south side of the river during the day and the north side of the river in the evening.
I think that's my sense too.
And so it's just an interesting dynamic, and I think that's one of the things I usually say, as you folks did in response to a comment about parking garage. It's difficult to place a parking garage because, I regularly walk to restaurants on the weekends, and I walk past the community lot and walk past open spots and get up here and you've got cars circling the block. So it's just sort of an interesting dynamic that we have.
Yeah,
It definitely lends itself to a central parking.
No, it unfortunately doesn't. I mean, Jim Newell, myself, Mike, Ben Hine, we devoted about a month this summer to periodically different hours, just driving around Chagrin. And the amount of underutilization of the parking lots. And it varied. Some were full at one time, others, it's just incredible. There's more than adequate parking spaces to handle the parking demand. What we've got to do is think of parking as a management issue, not as a capacity
It's interesting, right, because if you live here, you can usually find a spot, and I don't drive very often, but I've often told my middle school age daughters that they should stand out on the corner with a sign, that, you know, that we go to Hollywood and see maps and stuff. Hey, for $5, I'll tell you all good parking spots are. Because it can be done, but then, you know, that's the perception of people from, that are not living here, coming here, not being able to find parking is, as Mike Jude said, perception is reality, and I think it's hard when that can come down.
The other part of the perception is when you describe the parking congestion during different times of the day. Keep in mind, you're talking of the grand expanse of 4 blocks. And that's nothing downtown Cleveland